And so a quick reach out on the community outreach spreadsheet. We have some things I think going on in the next week or so with some Java folks. We had some .NET folks come in with .NET libraries and showed them last week, which was fantastic. Jamie McGee was wonderful about that, and he agreed to sort of be our ambassador to the .NET community. Anything else that folks want to update us on community outreach or feel they should add to this?
I'm probably just going to do some general outreach at this point, as opposed to talking to specific, very busy people to come and help us.
Okay, that's fine.
Just for the RPMs and dev side, because I feel like that's just low-hanging fruit, to be honest.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and my guess is, I mean, both RPMs and devs at the end of the day are a way of packaging some metadata together with the moral equivalent of tarballs, and some scripts. And so, you know, I feel like getting some, you know, figuring out how to fit properly into that metadata should be quite doable. And then figuring out how we should construct a Git bomb document across those tarballs should also be quite doable.
Cool.
All right.
Take an action to do that.
Cool. All right then. On the social media front, so Barathi has now been doing a great job of capturing the videos now with the new OmniBOR logo. So if you want to catch up on past meetings, those are up on YouTube. And then Chris has in principle automated the tweeting of those videos out as part of his ongoing efforts with the Twitter account, which is great. And then do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing with the Mastodon side of things, Chris?
So yeah, if you didn't see my stuff in Slack this morning, the Mastodon account that currently exists is because there's apparently a Mastodon instance template of some sort, a code base that will allow you to essentially mirror certain accounts from Twitter into your Mastodon instance. And that is what this one Git bomb account essentially is. Because of recent API changes, right? Like, I think me approaching this Twitter API changes, to be clear. I think approaching this person and saying, hey, would you mind like taking that down? We're going to set up an actual OmniBOR account and post to it as we would on Twitter as well. So just a general outreach piece, but it is a Git bomb thing. So it's probably not going to pick up the OmniBOR change, I wouldn't imagine. And I don't think there's any actual content there. So it's like, it's not even working as intended either. So it's like, hey, this one little thing, mind taking that down?
Yeah, my experience has been that the vast majority of people in such situations are basically helpful friendlies. And so if you approach them in that spirit, things go very well.
Cool.
Cool.
So yeah, that'll be after meeting. I've just got a lot of meetings today. So yeah.
Happens.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got some upcoming events. Ava has a keynote at ShmooCon, which I think is happening this week, where they will be mentioning OmniBOR. Ava and I have a talk on OmniBOR at Cloud Native SecCon, which is coming up in 2 weeks. Dear God, it's coming up so fast. Ava has suggested that we actually try and get something going for Usenix security, and that CFP is coming up. I just realized I should have copied in OSCon is coming up.
Oh yeah.
Open Source Summit is coming up, and their CFP is also closing in the next few weeks. So I should add that to the list here. By the way, it would be perfectly delightful if other people would like to give Git bomb or OmniBOR talks. It doesn't always have to be Ava and I. And then Chris was good enough to provide some links that we haven't fully digested for journal places to pull talks from. This reproducible builds conference coming up in Hamburg, do we know roughly when that is?
I want to say no.
Yeah, it's October 31st.
Oh, well, I'm out.
Spooky.
Yeah. on this front, I am doing a webinar next week, like a panel dealio, virtual panel. But it's on infrastructure as code. Now, security and infrastructure as code and automation kind of go hand in hand, I feel like. So there might be an opportunity there. So if you think of any talking points along the IAC route, feel free to shove them my way via Slack.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Infrastructure as code is always a fun topic. Particularly because like there's always this tension between trying to represent infrastructure as code in ways that mirror the physical world, which is often not a great plan, versus trying to express it in terms of outcomes and desires, which is often better.
Yeah.
Cool. All right then. And then we still have this item we're carrying forward, Chris, on the feedback on blog post stuff.
I was thinking about that this morning and how that might need to be increased in urgency. I have some time this Friday that I could work on it. So I'm just going to put that in my calendar now.
Sounds good.
Just to kind of hash away at it, like at 1 o'clock my time. If you want to join me, great. If not, that's fine too.
Yeah, feel free to ping me. I could probably come along to play if need be. Cool. I'm pretty flexible that time. So okay then. This is a tech meeting, so I wanted to open the floor for anybody who has POC related stuff. I do know that the Rust folks have been kind of busy, although they've been getting bogged down a little bit in DCO on commits on their stack of commits. But they've been doing some FFI stuff, but I don't think we have them here today. I know Nell has been unwell. Do folks have other things they want to talk to about tech on this call?
I'm just working on Git bomb to OmniBOR transition for LLVM, and I know Vaslav has made some. He's made some progress on the Symlink farm feature, but I think it's better to defer that discussion later.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, there is a little bit of transition, I know, for the various projects and repos and whatnot. The repos have been busily renaming themselves, but there is some sort of stuff in there in terms of, environment variable names and elf note, elf notes and that kind of stuff that requires some update as well. But I'm actually feeling kind of good about where we stand with C compilers at this point, because modulo those changes for the name update. I think we have both the LLVM client and LLD, as well as GCC and bin utils LD working. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
That is awesome news. Cool.
Hey all, I did I promised last week that I would take a look at the specs. And I did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I could probably go over it again because I'm sure it was. I spent most of my time just reading the web pages to make sure I understood everything. But I just made notes. I didn't make any changes on the to the specs, so I don't have write access for one thing. Where would you like? How would you like to get the notes? What would you want done with it?
Well, so there's a couple things. My off the bat thought would be that there are a couple things. Part of this depends on like how convenient or inconvenient this is for you, right? Because you're the one who's doing the work, and I have a great tendency to defer to the people doing the work. One thing you might do is open an issue. Git bomb makes it really easy to link into chunks of code that you're referring to. And so you could sort of say, this, that, and point to it from an issue. And so if that's something you're comfortable with, then that might be a very good way to go about it. And then, we've got sort of that in place and can work from the issue.
Sure, I could do that.
Cool. Many thanks. Do appreciate that.
Yeah.
So. All right. Anything else for this call, for the tech call this week?
I noticed there's been some discussion about external mode or like keeping the metadata out of the artifacts.
No embed, yes.
Yeah, that's it. I wonder, I have some questions about that. Like, unless the sort of general design has changed dramatically in the last few months, that concerns me because the current design requires every single artifact to be completely distinct. And if you really, the only way to guarantee that is by embedding the BOM information. So if you keep it external, then it kind of breaks the data model.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some challenges there. It might help to know sort of a little bit of the backstory on where that idea had come from, because generally speaking, you really do want the embedding, but one of the things that was actually brought up as a use case, and this was sort of an interesting use case, was if you had available the no embed mode, you could literally take the pile of existing, say, debs out there in the world, because debs are pretty good about reproducible builds, and you could rebuild them with the no embed mode and generate Git BOM information for them. And there is some value in being able to deal with existing artifacts, but it has exactly the problem that you've described, which is that you end up with multiple trees and other kinds of problems up the tree. So there are complications there. And as we sort of try to sort through some of the no embed mode, as you talk through those, the complications get to be more obvious, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm completely sympathetic with the reasoning behind why you want to do that. It just comes back to I think it fundamentally comes back to the fact that the existing data model doesn't explicitly represent the outputs of build processes, only the inputs.
Yeah, I mean, and this partially gets to be, yeah, I mean, and that is absolutely true, and part of it is the desire to carry a backward pointer to the inputs along with the outputs, because that's got a better chance of actually carrying that information along with it. But no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, one could look at a meta model where you basically have some output referencer that references the input referencer and carry it along that way. But again, you do wind up with this multiplicity problem again. It's sort of like we did have a conversation with some reproducible build folks who I tend to model reproducible builds in my own mind. And I think this is a pretty good model, as basically saying a build is reproducible if an equivalent set of inputs always produce an equivalent set of outputs, right? And the reproducible build people would like the equivalence relation on outputs to be byte for byte identical, which I also would like to be the case. But then the question becomes, how do you define the equivalence relation between the inputs? And there's at least some folks in reproducible build who would like to define it as any set of inputs that produces an equivalent set of outputs is an equivalent set of inputs. And that feels weird to me, because it would mean that CP as a build tool, together with the output, is an equivalent set of inputs to the entire build process, which seems odd.
Expand on that a bit.
So there are some folks in reproducible build land who would basically like it to be true that two sets of inputs that are different, right? Say I've got two sets of input source code and compilers, but they happen to build the same bytes. And so they would like to declare those inputs equivalent, meaning they would expect that two inputs that are different in a byte for a byte sense should always produce the same outputs.
Yep.
And that seems a little bit weird, because when you take that particular definition of input equivalence, you always you learn a lot by looking at things in extremis. And the extremist example that I gave there would be that then CP plus the output is equivalent to all the source code, the compilers, and everything else in the inputs. It's an equivalent input. But
that's a bit of a circular definition because you have to already have that output before you can generate the output.
I wasn't advocating for this definition.
No, but I think you've picked a hole in that specific definition, but it just needs to be a little bit more refined. I mean, that definition is interesting because like it means that if you have a build process that nominally includes a particular source file as an input, but in practice that source file has no effect on the build because like in practice it's not included, or it's if def'd out or something like that, it means that any source file will do in that stead. What that effectively means is that like if you're trying to use this graph data to say work out whether or not this particular artifact is subject to a security problem that's in that source file, but it turns out that the output is invariant to that source file, therefore it probably means that that output artifact is not actually affected by a security problem that's associated with that source file.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting sort of semi-philosophical discussions in there.
No, but this idea of equivalence, like any notion of equivalence beyond bit for bit identical, becomes very difficult because then you have to really talk about the semantics of those bits and how they're used in the specific system you're talking about.
Well, and when you talk about the semantics, you get to Tower of Babel pretty quickly, because the semantics also always end up relying very heavily on the particularities of language and the particularities of this or that build tool and whatnot. It does get messy quick. But anyway, I went off on a mad tangent, and I apologize for that.
But you're right that I mean, so I guess my point, coming back to the embed, no embed question, is that the question of whether or not you're embedding the metadata in the artifacts themselves is actually critical and fundamental, and it's not something you can easily switch on and off, because the current Git bomb design requires that embedding and cannot express, you can't express the output hash of a build process because it becomes a cyclic definition because it includes the metadata itself. If you go to the no embed model, then you have to have you have to express the outputs, and you can, because the output artifacts are not affected by the Git bomb metadata. But I basically, like, I could see that you could have a variant of the Git bomb design in which you could have external metadata, but it's a totally different design from the one that we're currently discussing. So I don't really like, there's a whole lot more design work required if you want to be able to switch backwards and forwards between those models freely within the same graph.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, in particular, one of the problems that you do run into is the multiplicity of valid graphs problem in the no embed model. Complicates things in a lot of ways. So,
I mean, one of the concerns I have about the current design is I'm still not quite, like, if you were given one of these graphs on its own without any other sort of annotation, could you actually use it? Like, would it be possible to actually find the correspondence between the nodes in the graph and the actual artifacts that you're dealing with in the actual build steps?
So there's some interesting stuff going on there with some of the Intoto folks. So the Witness folks announced last week that they actually have support for including, as part of their attestation of build process steps, the gitoids of the things that they're making attestations about, which means that in the embed case, if I'm an Intoto attestation about building something and I've got the gitoid of the resulting output, then I can actually go take that attestation, correspond to the artifact, and pull the identifier for the tree. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
So, I mean, your point, and this is something I think we've all sort of known, was we're not trying to solve all the problems in one place. In part because there's actually a lot of good work going on in other places. But no, your baseline point, I think, about, if all you've done is capture the get bomb information and you've not captured any of the other information, then how do you tie it back to the build steps? That gets interesting in a couple of ways. One is sort of the one that you pointed out. The other is we've had this side discussion from time to time about embedding in the tree information about the build chain and the build tool's configuration, in a way that doesn't imply that the build tools graph is a subgraph of the thing that was built, because we're not building the build tool into the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think also, like, I'm just sort of getting up to speed here again, but the data model never represents build steps at all. So there's nowhere to put that information.
Well, your fundamental insight, which is that it represents inputs, is absolutely true. When we had talked about the spec last week, we sort of re-brought up this question of git bomb representations of build tools and build tool configurations in tree, which was one approach to thinking about that. It's effectively treating the build tool itself and the build tool's configuration as a form of input to the system, if that makes sense.
Right.
Which is somewhat congruent to the way that I think a lot of the reproducible builds folks, not all of them, but some of them are reasoning about the build tool and the build tool configurations. But I think, yeah, so I mean that's definitely been one direction of conversation there. So
yeah, and that kind of gets back to the equivalence thing of, like, does the minute details of exactly how the build tool is configured or how it's invoked, should that be considered as important?
Yeah, and the tricky part about it is that reasoning about that at extremely high precisions requires an almost infinite amount of comprehension, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, I mean, it kind of comes back to exactly what is the real world problem that you're trying to solve, like whether or not the problem you're trying to solve requires that information or not. And and I think some of them do and some of them don't. So you have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, there are, occasionally people will bring up the rare, but they do exist. We had a CVE that was introduced by our compiler. That does happen, not very often, but it does happen. So
I had some comments and questions along the topic that this topic that was discussed last week as well, about what if the build tools have vulnerabilities and we need to identify all the software built using it, and that is the motive for trying to embed or include the OmniBOR ID of the build tool chain itself along with the OmniBOR data of the software that is being built. Is it okay to bring it up now, or would this be?
I think we've got a bit of field, and I think we're probably we're sort of off POX, and we're a little bit of field. So please feel free to bring it up now.
So one of the thing is, as this has been discussed now, it's very difficult to get an exact match of the OmniBOR ID unless the tool is getting picked up from a release version, and the release version has a OmniBOR ID that is put out, and then you use the same tool, and then you can if the released version has a vulnerability, you can like, for example, if GCC version X has a vulnerability and you're using the exact same release binary, then you're going to find the match, right? Otherwise, if like for reasons we discussed earlier, there could be built on different OS or different configuration, different optimization, or adding, like, even if you add your own comment or customization to the build tool, it's going to result in a different Omnibor ID that will not match. So while the Omnibor ID basically gives you the root of all the ADG that you want, that you're interested, so when I say that I have the Omnibor ID of the build tool, does it implicitly mean I have the entire set of Omnibor documents or the graph that I can traverse from starting that node? Is that an implicit, because just just having that ID alone wouldn't help unless I have all the associated data, which will help me navigate all the way till the leaf nodes, for that compiler.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this gets back to the question, and this is a bit of sociology of what the pressure looks like on the people who are publishing things. Because you take the much simpler version of this, where if I'm a vendor and I publish an image with an embedded GitBOM ID, the expectation is that there will be pressure to publish the artifact graph as well, because it lets other people do things around verification and validation of what's going on in the system. So, what it really comes down, but at the same time, we all know that there are vendors who will resist that, and there'll be a push and pull between, consumers and vendors.
Yeah. So in that case, only if that complete set of information is available, like I said, the exact match is going to be very impractical. So, or less, practical. But if we do have the full graph, then assuming a vulnerability has been identified and we know the vulnerability at the leaf artifact level, then we can, like just how we did the CV vulnerability proof of concept. It's just like build tool is another software for which a vulnerability has been identified, and we can go and figure out any build of that compiler software. It has the vulnerability or not, that can be detected if we have identified a vulnerable artifact that could potentially belong to a compiler.
Well, and there's also a little bit of difference. We focus a lot on the stuff that gets published out to the broader world, which is important stuff. But I know that there are several people who participate here who run extensive internal shops for building software, where all kinds of fun and creative things get done, right? So several of us maintain our own compilers and things of that nature, and a lot of us ship tens of thousands of images all the time. And just being able to, say, okay, well, the upstream GCC had a compiler bug, security CVE. We went and looked at the internal things and determined that these things with these GitBOM, these versions that we were using, which have these GitBOM IDs, which have these build tool identifiers, are actually vulnerable. So now we've got a relatively simple search through images by GitBOM, looking through their graphs to go and determine which images need to be rebuilt for tools. So yes, there is a pulling on the thread bit that has to go on, I agree. But I suspect that there are definitely use cases where that's quite doable, particularly if you're running like large software shops. And I know you, Jeremy, I think run an interesting large software shop in that you're mostly SaaS. And sitting here at Cisco, we do some SaaS, but we're also a lot of shipping images out to people that they put on devices.
We ship tons of mobile apps.
I suppose that's true. Yeah, definitely true.